Perrine Monogatari, or in English, The Story of Perrine, is probably the first anime that I have ever watched. At the time I wouldn't have recognized it as such since I was still young, but it was regardless a very fond childhood memory of mine. It was adapted from a novel by Hector Malot in 1878 named En Famille, or Nobody's Girl. The anime references many real-world locations, and this was another reason, aside from nostalgia, to rewatch the entire anime and experience Perrine's arduous journey to France. I wanted to see where exactly Perrine travelled to reach France and document the anime locations with their real-world counterparts. Although Perrine Monogatari is a fiction, the locations represented in the anime is surprisingly accurate to real-world locations and possibly some real-world events. I want to share their journey from Bosnia and Herzegovina to France with as few major spoilers as possible and explain some things I have learned along the way. What I will be doing is going through every episode and trying to find out the start and end locations and the time spent. I will also count the travel time and travel distance in between episodes, so time between the end of episode 12 and start of episode 13 will be called episode 12-13. I will use Google Maps to measure the fastest travel route and to show the distance between the two locations. Sometimes episodes will be grouped together because I do not have enough info, though I will try to have some educated guesses if possible. There will be a date and time, but that info comes few and far between. However, I will try to provide a date range. Firstly, some of the village names and locations mentioned either do not exist or has changed in the current world map, so cannot be located easily. Since we are dealing with an anime set in the 19th century, towns, especially small settlements, would have evolved and changed over the years. There could also be discrepancies between the anime and the novel. However, what is interesting is that although the anime starts Perrine's journey from Bosnia and Herzegovina, the novel begins from Paris. So the story we see in the anime before Paris is mostly anime only. This means that the anime might have more easily recognizable locations because it was made more recently. However, it is also likely that the locations before Paris are fictional as to not cause confusion or conflict with the source material. Regardless, we can still track her journey from the little clues we find and link them to real-world locations. We start off in episode 1 at Buzovaca in the morning of March 24, 1878. Perrine and her mother travels to two unnamed villages, the signal of which should be modern-day Vitez since it is large enough to have existed in 1878. The innkeeper at the village suggested two other towns, Travnik and Bugojno, to do their photography business. This means that the town that episode ends should be Vitez, a town large enough to be reached within a day and large enough to have existed since 1878. Not to mention that it is located before Travnik, otherwise the innkeeper wouldn't have suggested them. The episode ends the next day on the 25th of March after travelling 14 kilometers over 1.5 days. In general, I would consider larger towns over smaller towns or villages for any unnamed locations. After the end of episode 1, we don't get any information regarding their location. However, we do get names of villages such as Kado, Storka, Pronaska, but they cannot be found on the map. A week passes on episode 1-2, and episode 2 is where they arrive at Kado village, probably Yaise in the real world, then spend 2.5 days on their way to Storka village. A few days pass on episode 2-3, at which they pass Storka village. This village could be Mikonich Grad or Kriuch. Episode 3 lasts 1.5 days, at which we are told Pronaska, the next village, is still far away. Episode 3-4 lasts about a week, which should be ample time for Perrine and her mother to travel the distance. The pair arrives at the Croatian border in episode 4. You may be wondering why I thought that this was a path that they took and not farther north. The border with Croatia is quite long, but a map is shown at episode 11, displaying the approximate path which they took. This map proves to be very helpful in the later episodes as well. The map shows the path they took from Bosnia and Herzegovina to Italy, and when compared to Google Maps, I can reasonably guess the path that they took. It shows that Perrine and her mother probably went through the city of Bihać to the border at the northwest. The road does seem to be surrounded by forest, as it is reflected in the anime as well. So from the tears in episode 1-2 to the Croatian border at the start of episode 4 totals 245 kilometers in total. Episode 4 then ends at Garrosh village, likely modern day Grabovac in Croatia, after another day and travelling 17 kilometers. The journey through Croatia is difficult to pinpoint because it is only featured in episode 5, and so we do not get many reference locations. Episode 4-5 lasts 1 to 3 weeks, and episode 5-6 is roughly 2 to 4 weeks. This should mean that Perrine is roughly halfway to Trieste at episode 5. However, it was mentioned that they were nearing the Italian border, which means that they are located all the way at Rijeka and close to crossing into Slovenia and then to Italy. At the start of episode 6, they would have travelled a total of 259 kilometers from Grabovac in Croatia at the end of episode 4, all the way to Trieste in Italy. Their time in Trieste is short, however, and they leave for Verona and towards Milan. Perrine left Trieste for Verona on episode 6-7, though we don't know how far or how long they travelled. In episode 7, they visited 2 unnamed villages lasting 1.5 days. Episode 7-8 lasts 10 days, and in episode 8 they visit another unnamed village lasting another 1.5 days. Finally, they near Verona in episode 8-9 and arriving there in episode 9. The time spent is at least 13 days from Trieste to Verona. Again, just like Grabovac to Trieste, we do not get any definitive locations between Trieste and Verona. So we'll have to make do with the distance between the two towns, referencing the episode 11 map. This totals to 260 kilometers from Trieste to Verona. Episode 9 starts in Verona and lasts about 1.5 days, ending on the 25th of May. From here they travel to Milan, which again does not have too many clear references to real world towns and villages. However, we are coming up to the more interesting part of the journey. Episode 9-10 lasts about a day for an unknown distance. Then Perrine visits a village in episode 10 which may have been Brescia, because at the end of the episode the rival photographers decided to take a different road to do their business. Assuming both Perrine and the rivals are both going to Milan, a fork at the west side of Brescia could be the location where this happened. In episode 10-11, at least 3 days should have passed, since we are told that it is June in episode 11. Perrine and her mother was planning to get to Milan within a day in episode 11, which the pair travels. This means that they arrived at Milan in episode 12, and from Verona to Milan they spend a total of around 8 days travelling 143 kilometers. This proves to be consistent with the pace which they travelled previously. At the end of the episode, the pair leave for Switzerland after spending just 1 day in Milan. Perrine and her mother then travels 125 kilometers to Domodossola in 10 days. This is a town at the northwest of Milan, close to the Swiss border. From there, they will hike up the Alps and west through Switzerland. In episode 13, Perrine and her mother travels to the border from Domodossola. Before crossing the border, however, we see them passing through a tunnel. I really like this attention to detail because there are indeed a few tunnels on this very road, as we can see from Google Maps. They then cross the border and begins to hike to the top of the Alps through Simplon Pass. This was a 2.5 day travel over 43 kilometers. From the top, they descend 22 kilometers down the mountain to Brig for another 2 to 3 days. From Brig, they travel to Sierre in just 1 day in episode 14, a total of 41 kilometers. They travel farther than normal because of an accident which occurred. Now, I don't know about everyone else, but I feel like it's a real exaggeration to be so worried about a sprained ankle. It's not like she fell off a cliff and head first onto some rocks. Then again, it was the 19th century where medicine wasn't as developed like we have now. On a related note, this episode also happens to contain the most memorable scene of mine. It was a happy moment during a time where a normally optimistic Perrine was feeling down after a preventable accident. Episode 1415 takes us to Lausanne at Lake Geneva, which lasts 10 days. This is the town they arrive at in episode 15. I believe this is Lausanne because we can see the lake. From a quarrelling couple, they indicated that Geneva was still a distance away. Lausanne also lines up with the next location they traveled to, Milord village, and subsequent locations, which we will see. I was not able to find an alternative path through Geneva which matched up with the information I had. The episode ends in Jutnier, a town that is inside France. I did think about Pontellier, but I think it was too far of a travel distance. The pair travels to and stays for 10 days at the next location, Dole, in episode 15-16. In episode 16, they spend 2 more days there but do not travel until the end of the episode. At the end of the episode, we are told that they are 300 kilometers away from Paris. Dole is the only location southeast of Paris that lines up with this distance. Probably isn't the larger town Dijon at the northwest, since we do not see a resemblance of a town with many buildings, though Perrine does travel up to Repulse for business. This place is probably Dijon. It couldn't have been Besançon, otherwise it wouldn't have warranted travelling to another town such a distance away. Finally, the pair travels to Paris for 2 to 4 weeks over 337 kilometers to Paris, and arrives at the start of episode 17. Do note that the distance is 337 kilometers because the route is not direct. Perrine and her mother do not travel throughout episode 17 to episode 21-22, lasting about a week. At this point, we are told that it is now August. In episode 22, Perrine travels by train to Le Chapelle in central Paris. Episode 22-23 covers the train ride, and episode 23 is when she gets off the train, arrives at Le Chapelle, and carries on north to Saint Denis in northern Paris. At this time, we are also introduced to the worst human being in the anime. There are previous character conflicts which I saw as just another obstacle for them to overcome, but this episode was simply infuriating. I won't spoil it, but it's episode 23 if you would like to watch it. Episode 23-24 and episode 24-25 shows Perrine's journey north, but we don't have any information on the location. But Perrine probably passed the town of Meru in episode 24. Now in the anime, the road mentioned was Calais Road. However, I could not find said road on the current world map, only a few POIs and not much indication of a road. However, if you follow the A16 highway north, you can see that it ends up right through the city of Calais. The A16 also goes through Amiens and near Maricourt. So I think it is reasonable to believe that the so-called Calais Road means the current A16 highway. Or maybe I just missed it because all the roads are in French. Knowing this, in episode 25 we have Perrine arrive at a hospital in some town. The town could be somewhere halfway on the A16 between Paris and Amiens, most likely being Beauvais. This is also how I concluded that the town she passed in the previous episode was Meru. The total distance from Saint Denis in Paris to Beauvais being 72 kilometers. Perrine stays at the hospital in episode 25-26, and in episode 26 leaves for Piquigny near Amiens. Piquigny was the original train station which Perrine was supposed to take the train to, but she did not have enough money. Perrine arrives near Piquigny on the road down to Maricourt, and finally makes her final trek at episode 26-27. She comes to a road sign at the start of episode 27, indicating that she is close to Maricourt. Finally, after a total of 2,000 kilometers, visiting 6 countries over 5 months, she arrives at the town where her grandfather lives. When I searched for Maricourt when I began my research, I could not find it at all. I tried searching in Chinese and Japanese and I could not find it even on the map. All of the other location names didn't really matter because they were just towns and villages they passed. but I wasn't right if Model Court, the main focus of the anime, could not even be located. That's when I found a video in Japanese on YouTube. From what I understood, they found the actual location name of Model Court, namely Flixer Court. In the video, I not only found out that the name was different, but there are even some memorable locations in the anime that actually exist in the real life Model Court. I didn't expect there to actually be a real life counterpart to one of the most notable buildings in the anime. At first I simply wanted to document the journey of Perrine from Bosnia and Herzegovina to France because I like mapping things out. I did not realize how accurate, or at least from this experience, the anime reflects to real life locations, despite being based on a fictional novel. Of course there could have been huge coincidences, but it was still fun to speculate where Perrine could have travelled. Thank you for joining me on my journey to revisit and rediscover the first anime which I watched as a kid and now as an adult. Thank you for watching.